Okay, just give it a few minutes. The link is, oh, okay, I think it's loaded now. Good morning, the people in the US, especially Stephen. Very good morning, if there's such a word. Good evening, the people in East Africa, mostly Kenya, and for the rest of the team that will join us on later. You can also follow the beginning portion from the Facebook page, Authentic Dialogue with Saya. So I will put the link on the chat. We're going to have a discussion around death. I know the past 2 years have been hard because one or the other person has been touched by COVID, adversely so. And as usual, we will start with Saya because there's a way he frames these things well. Imagine we were brought up in the same household, but his English is a 1,000 times better than mine. So we'll start with Saya, then the panelists will introduce themselves. As usual, I'll be the moderator. So Saya, go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone and welcome to yet another Authentic Dialogue. We continuously are happy that you're here. One of the biggest mysteries in life is death. It has been, and by all looks of things, it will be for the foreseeable future. A lot of religions have been constructed around it. A lot of ceremony, a lot of taboo has been constructed around it. In fact, in many regards, people have argued that even what we call modernity is just an attempt to prepare us well to either avoid or come face to face with death. The ways of dealing it are bizarre. In Kenya, there's actively a discussion going on right now about something we call funeral homes. And in case you're thinking it's the place where people are taken when they're dead, you're wrong. It is the concept, for instance, of people in the diaspora investing heavily in building very elaborate homes back home in the village. And the key motivation is they're thinking when they die, where will they be taken? And those houses stay without any meaningful occupancy for decades, and they come to use during the funeral period. That's why they're called funeral homes. That's just one indicator of how seriously we take the death question. If you have any religious inclination, when you read, for instance, the Bible says when Moses died, the people did not move. The Israelites who were on transit to Canaan did not move for 40 days and 40 nights. They mourned for a 40-day, 40-night period. So death is as old as we've been, and dealing with it, it's one of the biggest, most challenging transitions people go through. And so I think today we need to have a discussion about how do we, like with all transitions, how do we prepare for, go through, and emerge from the death of a loved one? Of course, if we ourselves are dead, we wouldn't be party of this, but how do we prepare for, how do we go through, and how do we emerge from death episodes without losing hope and being able to grieve, but grieve meaningfully? In traditional Africa, when warriors came back from war, they were not reincorporated into the immediate society. There was a process of sucking out bad blood out of them, because the idea was they'd experienced a lot of trauma, seen and engaged in a lot of death, and they needed to go through certain things before they could meaningfully re-engage with society. What would be the equivalent for that in these modern times that people are dealing with death at a quite high rate yet again? What do we need to do? What do we need to have in place? How do we have the discussions around death with our loved ones? I remember once I had a discussion about cremation. I suggested I want to be cremated, and I did this at a wrong time around the family table. And my father just dismissed that talk by saying, you know, when you're dead, your body becomes our possession, and we will do with it what we want. But how do we have such discussions about how do I want my body disposed? How do I want my people, my property dealt with? So how do we prepare well so that by the time, if I'm the one to die, I am able to do so with peace, not too worried about the security and the safeguarding of my interests and the people who I care about post my demise. Death is such a nervous topic that I must even confess that even speaking about it this way, it's not the norm in our society. I feel a certain way. And this may not be one of those Zoom calls where people jump in like the wood for others because death is a taboo topic, but it's one of the realities we've lived with, and I think we need to begin dealing with it. So, Pastor, over to you, and looking forward to having meaningful experiences today and looking to learn from all of us about the entire death question.
Thank you, sir. That was well put. So we'll and Mercy, I recognize your high five, I think, or a clap. So we'll start with, as a way of introduction of our panelists, I'll ask this question. What drew to death? Because the three of you are surrounded and immersed in death, sort of. Just what drew to this, and then we'll go through the process Saya has stated for us. So Jane, as I said, we start with visitors. So Jane, just tell us what the heck is a death doula and how did you get there?
Okay, hi. Good morning. I'm so happy to be part of this discussion. The vibe is very warm and welcoming. Thank you. Doula is a Greek word that means servant, and most people have heard of it in connection with birth. So a death doula is a servant to the dying person first and foremost, and their family after that. And really, we take our direction from the person themselves. And I do exercises with people thinking, you know, how do you want to feel on your deathbed when you can no longer move your body or speak, but you can hear and you are still here? How do you want to feel in your head? You know, what are the things that we need to take care of now so you aren't anxious about financial stuff or practical matters or where your passwords are or who's getting what? And then how do you want to feel in your heart, you know, with the relationships that you have? How do you say goodbye to people? How do you come to a place of acceptance with the difficult things and the people in your life? And then how do you want to feel in your physical body? How can I keep you comfortable? Like, what kind of music do you like? Do you like touch? What kind of people do you want there? Do you want people with you at your moment of death? Do you want to be alone? Where do you want to die? Do you want to be able to see the sky? Those kind of questions. And then last, the spirit. I currently work as a death doula at a skilled nursing facility in Minneapolis. And I seem to have a lot of people who have fallen away from their religion of birth. And so when you're facing death and you have done no spiritual examination about what happens after your life, you know, what happens after death, that can be anxiety producing. So I can explore, and really I am non-judgmental. I try to enter the work without any answers. I think death is a time where the things that you have been running from all your life catch up to you. And then you're holding all the weight of disappointments or things you didn't get to do, or, you know, and so a doula is someone who can hold those things with you while you look at them and then give them back to you. Because with hopefully a change in perspective or a shift in that weight. And I came to this work. I used to be a high school teacher and athletic director and coach. And then my husband got kidney cancer and he died in 4 months. And we had a 9 and a 12-year-old, and neither one of us had done any thinking about death or any preparing for death. I had no idea how the process unfolded, and so much anxiety. And we had hospice and it was amazing, but they're only, in the US, hospice is only there 5% of the time on average. So 95% of the time, you are dealing with this on your own, with basically no tools, because you have pushed it away and your culture has pushed it away, and you're, it's this profound experience that I didn't feel ready for. And so after he died, I was acutely aware of how short life is. And I thought, I want to live to my purpose. I'm going to follow my intuition. And it led me to grief and dying and death. And then I found out about being a death doula. And I did a training in 2015 and opened my business in 2016. And then no one ever called because no one wants to talk about death. You know, people will call me from the hospital when someone had 2 hours left to live, and you can't do very much at that point. So that's my story, and I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to learn about how Kenyans approach death and what does your culture teach you about preparing. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. So a bit about Kenya, we have 52 tribes. My own tribe has refused to be named as one tribe. It has 18 sub-nations. So each, the only Sai and I, because let me see, we can tell from people's surname, last name. My sister is also here. So we share the same culture, the three of us, but the rest, Stephen and Asaf and Shiko and the rest have a different culture. So it's not one culture, it's different, but it's been sprinkled with a bit of modernity, and religious stuff has also poured in. So it's different. Okay. So let me go to, the pastor will be last because the pastor always prays last before we go into the grave, right? Stephen, I know you're shaking your head, but I'll go to my fellow medic, Asaf. How are you drawn to the business of death? And if you could just explain what a hospice is, and if it's different from what Jane has explained what a death doula is.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Asaf Kenyanjui. I'm a medical doctor working in the palliative care and hospice fields for the last probably about 11 years. So I interact with patients and families, and especially towards end of life on a daily basis. I think for us, the hospice care is slightly different from the West. We are really pushing to ensure that once an individual is diagnosed with a hard to cure illness, then they are also linked with a palliative or a hospice care provider so that they can be able to walk with them the journey, be able to support them, and also be able to prepare them even for end of life, including death. As Jen said, sometimes it's very frustrating when you're called when the patient is almost gasping or almost dying. And if the family and other practitioners expect you to sort of support these patients holistically. During that time, there are a lot of emotions, anxiety, and it's hard to achieve. So one of the things we are really pushing is to have individuals refer to palliative care providers or hospice practitioners as early as possible, so that these individuals can be able to get the required support. I think for my hope, even as we continue with this discussion, is that the process of dying and even discussions about dying will be driven by the person who is dying. In my experience is that mostly families tend to shield their loved one from this discussion, so they will feel
Asaf has disappeared on us. It's the internet in Kenya can be shaky, so I will mute him. When he comes back, we will bring him back on.
Psychologically, a lot of anxiety and manage the issues that need to be addressed. But I think for us, also I realize what works well for us is that we are a very spiritual society, and I think that also in a way helps individuals to have a smooth transition because they have sort of an expectation of life after. So look forward to having this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, Stephen, it's your time to shine. What's your role as a chaplain, and what's the difference between a chaplain and a normal kawaida? Jane understands 2 words of Swahili, so kawaida pastor. In terms of death, and what drew you to this line of work?
Pastor, and what's the difference between a chaplain and a doula, now that we've learned what a doula does?
Okay, Stephen, yes. what's the difference between a normal pastor, a doula, and a chaplain, and what exactly is your role?
Okay, those are many questions, but I'll try to take on them. So there's the roles of a pastor and a chaplain seem to overlap in many ways. For myself, I started off as a pastor and then transitioned into being a chaplain. So you can make that transition from being a pastor to being a chaplain. And there's some who kind of straddle both fields at the same time. But as a chaplain, especially here in the US, you take more training. Usually they would require pretty much more or less the same training as a pastor for you to take what we call clinical pastoral education, CPE, here in the US. They would require like a master's degree. Most of the time it's a Master of Divinity that they take, and then they train you because they find the skills that you have as a pastor very useful in chaplaincy work, because you can apply those things in the medical field, in hospice, and many other fields, in education, in prisons, in places like that. So it's a matter of just a little bit of extra training to broaden your perspective, because most pastors, are really just inclined towards one religious tradition, and pastors are more evangelistic, trying to convert people to what they believe. But being a chaplain is different, because you go to a person and you try to hear them out and understand where they're coming from, and understand the spiritual resources that they have and how that can be useful for them, in life, in what they're going through, whether it's an illness at the hospital, whether it's someone facing death at a hospice, whether it's a student, struggling with academic matters in school. So you help them without any discrimination or prejudice towards whatever religious or spiritual preference they have. You actually just come on board and help them, leverage on the spiritual resources they have to achieve their goals, to have a better quality of life. So that's the task of a chaplain. It differs a little bit from, actually a great deal from a pastor. So clinical pastoral education is usually offered in hospitals here in the States, mostly. It takes different units, and those lead up to what we call board chaplaincy certification, which usually is required. If you're going to work in a hospital, you'd require a certain minimum, maybe of 4 units of CPE and perhaps board chaplaincy certification, which may not be the requirement for a pastoral job. You can just get into a pastoral job based on confessing that you believe certain beliefs and you subscribe to a certain theological tradition, and then you can just start working. Some even start working as pastors without even a bachelor's training, and it's different for different faith traditions. About a chaplain and the death doula, just like Jane has said, chaplains try to do what we call a ministry, to offer what we call a ministry of presence, to be there with the patient, if it's in a hospital, or with someone who is dying, or with their family, if it's in a hospice case. And it can be even more than that. Schools, like I've said, prisons, ministry of presence, just with people going through suffering, different modes of suffering. We try to offer presence. But with all those fields, let's say, for instance, if you're working at a hospital, hospitals have certain targets and goals. Like, you cannot spend too much time with a patient. I've worked in hospitals and hospices. If you have a floor, for instance, of 30 patients at a hospital, at one time I had like 2 floors, you had like 60 patients. You cannot spend 2 hours, with one patient, because you've got to do your rounds just like a doctor does their rounds and see your patient. So you're limited in how much time you can spend. So that's one area where you're limited, and management kind of tracks how much time you're spending with each patient. all these things don't really match very well. And then again, in a hospital setup, for most of you who've worked in the medical setup here in the US, patients come in and don't stay for more than 3 days max for most of them who come in. So you're meeting someone who comes in, you don't know anything about them, you're starting off with them in the midst of a whole lot of pain and suffering, and then you've got limited time to spend with them, and before you know it, they're gone. Because by the time you do your rounds, finish, it's probably 2 or 3 days later by the time you come back, and they're probably leaving. So you are limited in how much time you can spend with the patient at a hospital setting. Even at a hospice setting, you have a little more latitude. You can spend a little more time, but you cannot spend infinite time. I can't stay for a whole day with a patient. I can spend maybe an hour or two, with them in a very meaningful way, but I cannot be there as much as maybe Jane would as a death doula. At the hospice, we work with what we call interdisciplinary group, a team. Every patient has a team that works with them. This team is composed of a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, and a chaplain, or we call them spiritual support counselors. They all come on board to support the patient. And sometimes you have a CNA also. So we kind of rotate in how we do our visits to the patient. One day, maybe a social worker can go, and next time maybe a nurse. So that way we keep the connection and the presence going, and we work together as a team, but we cannot be there like consistently. And dying people at the most critical time of their lives, they need presence more than anything, especially like here in the States where there's a lot of loneliness, very little family. I think a death doula is a very useful person at such a critical time. Lastly, what drew me to this profession was a long journey. For me, just finding my career was a pretty difficult journey. It was quite complicated just to try and find what is meaningful for me in life to do. So initially, I started as a pastor. I did about 3.5 years in Kenya. Then I came over to the US to do some more training for pastoral ministry. So I did my Master of Divinity in Michigan for 3.5 years and completed that. And I was just preparing for regular pastoral ministry. And then I completed my graduate studies, my MDiv, in 2020, right when COVID was beginning. We're getting into the thick of COVID and all churches were shut down and nobody was hiring. So it was a very weird time because I've prepared for not hospital, but church ministry, and all the churches worldwide are closed. So I had to find a way, what do I do? So I had to look at different options. And then that's how I looked into healthcare and discovered that there's chaplaincy, and really started running with it because I did have a lot of interest in the medical field. Initially, I had wanted to become a doctor. I had actually gotten into medical school at the University of Nairobi, and then I left trying to find what I need to do. So when I discovered that there's a way I could merge my initial dream of getting into healthcare and now what I considered my calling as a pastor in healthcare, then I totally plunged myself into it, went for CPE training. And then gradually I found myself dealing with a lot of people who were dying because I had 2 floors of COVID patients that I was attending to at that time. And so I dealt with a lot of death at that point. And I do have a little bit of a background where I encountered a pretty bad death in the family of my younger brother. That really affected me. That was before I came to the States. And I discovered there's absolutely no resources to help people in dealing with death, So you have a case, and there's different kinds of death, in the world. Like mine, in my case, for instance, it was unfortunately a suicide, And so here I am as a pastor, and I don't know what to do, and my church doesn't know what to do. And then finally, here I am as a chaplain dealing with a lot of death. And I'm getting to discover, there's actually resources to help people walk this journey. So eventually that's how I veered into hospice care. And for the most part, what I've been doing is just caring for the dying and their families right now.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry for the death. And we will tackle the debriefing people who deal with a lot of death do maybe towards the end. As someone who straddled both worlds, and this is one of the reasons I do this, is to infuse, the good things of the States and the good things of Kenya so that we can have one nice, warm, fuzzy good thing. I worked in mission hospitals in Kenya and a private hospital. There's no chaplain. So like where I was in Kerugoya, my utmost favorite place in the world, I wish tribalism was not a thing. Because it's an Anglican church, the chaplain was the pastor. So the pastor would go around and talk to the people, the dead, the living, and just talk to them and just come and tell you as a doctor, like I talked to this person and this and so forth. But in the US, chaplains actually write notes in the electronic medical record. That's how they can know Stephen spent 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's actually part of the record. Like because I hung out a lot in the ICU before COVID, we the medical side actually request the hospice team and the chaplain to come and talk to either the family or the patient if they want, and they can absolutely say no. So that's the huge difference. They are trained and they actually write into the notes, which is not something that happens in Kenya. And I wish we can just sprinkle to my Munjeche, I'll mention all the towns by the time we are done with all these things. My Munjeche SDA church pastor to get some of this training so that they can deal with the death and dying in a better manner than what happened to you and your family. And so, how do we broach how do we broach the subject? Like, what do you go and ask people? Hi, so and so, can we talk about death? How do we broach the subject? And Jana will start with you as a death doula. How do you broach the topic of death, especially for people who feel infallible, not the dying, like the healthy, you and I who are looking healthy? How do you broach the subject?
Very carefully. It's different for everybody. Some people, it's a very, very long road. At the nursing home where I work at, I'm mostly with folks who are on hospice. So they've been identified by someone that was 6 months or less to live. For example, I have a man now who's been on dialysis for months and months and months, and we have not even, maybe I tried to bring it up, like, how are you feeling about being hospice? How does that feel? And I could tell he just gave me a wall of words. So I was like, okay, I think denial is a cloak that we put around ourselves until we're ready to deal with something that feels too big. So I'm not going to strip away his denial unless I have something pretty good to replace it with. So my golden rule is to go at their pace. And if it gets to the point where someone is very critical and they still aren't there, like I had, I'm switching stories, but I had a woman who's 52 with stage 4 cancer, and everybody, the nursing home staff, it was traumatic for them because this woman was vibrant and 52 and no one wanted to talk about it. So frequently I say, like, and this is a general palliative care question, based on everything you've heard, everything you've been told by doctors, and most importantly, everything you feel in your body, what is your understanding of what's going on with you? And I asked this woman that question, and she immediately started crying, and she said, it's coming. I can feel it coming. And I said, tell me more about that, which is another thing I always say. And she said, I can feel that I'm dying, and I'm so scared, and I'm not ready for this. And I think silence is a very good tool for anyone in this trade to just let those uncomfortable feelings be. And so I wait a long time after people say things like that. And then often I'll say, like, is that okay with you? Or do you wish things were different? And then I give them a long time to think about it. So yeah, I don't have, and with that particular woman, she cried, and we talked about courage and where she's found courage. And then I said, okay, I can see you're tired. Lunch is coming up. I'm going to go. I'll be back after lunch, which is, again, a luxury of death doula. I can circle back on people. And then before I went into her room after lunch, I went to the nursing station. I said, how's she doing? And the nurse said, well, she's not doing very well. Like, she's got the covers over her head and she's been crying. Somebody told her something. And I said, yes, somebody told her something. Like, we can't not expect sorrow. We can't not expect people to fall apart. That is part of their process. And we have to believe that there is something on the other side of that is peace and the ability to talk about things in a meaningful way about what they want for the end of their life. How do they want to say goodbye? You can't get to that without going through that sorrow. So I went to see her, and I frequently ask people, are you having any dreams? And she said, yes, I keep having this dream about my grandmother who's already passed, I said, what's the dream? And she said, this really happened. I was supposed to go to camp when I was in 6th grade, and I was hiding under the dining room table because I didn't want to go. And my grandmother crawled under the table with me, and she told me that I was strong and that I could do this, and reminded me that I had courage. And I said, why do you think you're having that dream? And she says, I don't know. And I was like, really? You don't know why your grandmother's coming here to tell you that you have courage and you can do this? So I said, you don't have to be able to die today. You just have to be able to do this day. And this day is dealing with the sorrow that your life is going to end well before you wanted it to. So I think just opening that door, that's what I think of. Like, I'm opening the door a tiny bit, and nobody else in their world, like the man who was just talking, is doing that for them. You know, so a chaplain or a doula can come in and say, because it's right at the surface, you know, it's just like someone is giving them permission to talk about this. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Asaf, I know you also deal with people towards the end of life, but how do you broach the subject with them, and how do you broach the subject with other people who are not dealing with end of life period?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very tricky issue, but what I usually do is to help the patient reflect on their medical journey, and especially if the patients have been on sort of a long care. So they will tell you, probably when I was diagnosed with, let's say, cancer, I've gone through the whole sort of cycles of trying to get cure, and now from there, maybe the oncologists have already discussed with the patient that it might be not possible to achieve cure. So I ask the patient, if you have reached at this point, so what is going through your mind, and what do you think are the next steps? And from that discussion, then the patient will start opening up and say, as Jen said, I'm starting to appreciate that, yes, I'm getting to the end of my life. And then from there, then I'll ask her, what are your concerns? What are your fears? How prepared are you, or how do you want us as a team from the hospice to support you in to make sure that the transition is very, very effective? And when it's patient driven, I find it becomes very easy to be able to support them. But as I said earlier, a lot of the time you want to introduce this topic, and you can, when you look at the family members' faces, you can tell they are not very comfortable having this discussion. But the patient is very willing for you to initiate the discussion so that they can be able to open up, state their wishes, and sometimes even when there are issues or conflicts, they would want to ensure that before they die, they have resolved some of those issues. So we try even also encourage the family members to appreciate, yes, the patient is going to die, and it's good to appreciate and let them be able to express their wishes, and also to express their needs and how they would also want even the final rituals to be done. It's in our context, I know there are some communities really don't even want to hear the word death. So for me, what I have done is to try and avoid using the words, and mostly talk about transition of life. And I think from there, people start to appreciate that, yes, they are going to have different transitions. And from that perspective, the people are able to open up. And I think one of the other challenge, and I know that we have a pastor on board, is who sometimes also make the situation a bit challenging for us. You discuss with the patient and they prepare them very well even for death. Then the pastor comes the following day, annoys the patient and tells them you'll be okay and you're going to get your healing. And you end up going back to scratch again through that journey. So I'm hoping even one of the things is also we'll try to look at how we can be able to support our colleagues in the religious sort of background to be able to support patients and families effectively.
And I just want to juxtapose something.
On that one, I had to laugh out loudly. Like, but practically, how do you want? Steve has to peddle hope. You have to peddle practicality, and the two come at odds. I'm very keen to see how that will be reconciled when somebody has been put ready to die, and then the pastor says, "You will live, you will not die." It's a very interesting one, though.
And I just want to juxtapose. Saya, we're coming back to you, then we'll go to Stephen because the burden is on him. I just want you to go through the Luya. Luya is my community, Jane. It's my tribe in Kenya. We have elaborate death, everything. We are dramatic as it comes. Saya, I just want you to just do like a high level Luya ritual. Like, we already know where my father is gonna be buried. We already know where my mother is gonna be buried, and that has been culturally set. And once and how medicalization and the Stevens of this world have changed that dynamic to put Asaf in trouble. I know you've understood all those words.
Yeah, that's a challenge of being born with, being the younger brother of Aswani. So the Luya culture, and which is not too dissimilar to other cultures. The manifestation differs with other cultures, but the concepts and the principles are similar. So when it comes to death, there are certain things that are standard, they're known. So number one was the duration of mourning. Part of it was also informed by the fact that traditionally, we didn't have advanced medical care. And at times somebody could have gone into a coma and people mistook it to be death. So there's a period of mourning for, it's longer for the man than it is for the woman. I don't know why, but it is.
Thank you.
And that is in part informed, I think it was like a week. It is informed so that you can go notify the relatives. And just imagine, just think of the world before phones and all of that. The journey had to happen physically on foot. So the period was long enough to ensure, one, if this person was in a coma, they could revive 2-3 days later, so that you do not bury the living. But then two, that the relatives could be summoned to come and mourn. It's very difficult. The Luya culture cannot pull off what Islam does, bury on the same day. And our protracted period of mourning with a body and everything helps with closure. We don't sniffle. When we mourn, we cry. It is both, and that's one unique thing. In Luya, when you're circumcised and it's done without anesthesia, you're not meant to cry. But when death occurs, you are both permitted and expected to cry. Even as a man, you're expected to vocalize your sorrow. And there's the accompanying cast. So any person coming into the homestead to mourn mourns loudly, and the other people come and mourn with you. And imagine this happening over a period of, say, 5 days or a week. It helps with closure. And our mourning is not just tears, it's venting. We vent in our mourning. people do all manner of things. They quarrel with the dead, they blame and accuse whoever they want to blame. They do it verbally. They speak about their fears. How will this homestead be? And you see, this is happening over a week, and there are people who are coming and everything. And traditionally, the homestead where death had occurred didn't cook. Food was brought in by every person coming in, whether it's your relatives coming in, whether it's the neighbors coming in. So traditionally, fire was not meant to be lit in the homestead for the purpose of cooking. Fire was only lit for the purpose of keeping people who kept the night vigil warm. The place of laying the dead to rest was known. So the man is traditionally buried on the right-hand side of his house. The woman of the home is buried on the left side of the home, unless stated otherwise, where they probably would be buried on the side. So that reduced dispute on certain level of things like the procedures and everything, because back in the old days, there was no mortuary to be taken to. The dressing and everything was done in the home. But the whole sense of community that was thrown around the affected family. In fact, back in the old days, if your immediate relatives and your immediate neighbors, farming activities stopped. Like there was such a strong show of solidarity through the entire grieving process to bring it to conclusion. Then after the burial, there was, the word is better known in my mother tongue. There was a period later on when people would come for makumbusho. I need a better
like
word.
a memorial.
It's like a memorial, but it's, you know, memorial is so medical, it's so sanitized. But let's just use that word. There's like a memorial that was done later on, and individuals would come. And one other thing that is attached very strongly to our death process in Africa and in my own community, Luya, now came through the naming, so that children who are born either around that time or shortly after would be named after the deceased, because of the belief of continuity. Like, hey, of course, now with Christianity, we don't believe that, but there was a belief like, hey, the dead person is now continuing, or their memory or their legacy can be continued in the life of the newborn. So the challenge, of course, for the modern Luya person is that their DNA, and that's a challenge with the modern African person, is at DNA, we are everything we have described. But now the medicalization, where grief can be, you can take tablets, or you can try and explain it away. And so the process is either rushed because, hey, people need to go back to work, or they need to go. We don't properly grieve through the entire process. And also, some forms of spirituality have tended to suppress. I've seen, for instance, verses like, I do not want you to grieve like the unbelievers, taken to a fairly radical end, where people now, back in my Luya culture, we would vent. Our mourning was venting, expressing our fear, our anxieties. How will this homestead be? How will these people be? Who will give me XYZ when I come? But now you find in a more sophisticated or posh world, people feel it's inappropriate to do this. And therefore, there's a lot of pent-up things that are being stored in people's hearts as they go through the grieving process that has been short-circuited. And again, I think Steve will be taking in flack for the team. I therefore believe that there needs to be a going back and seeing what was healthy and acceptable within my Luya culture that needs to still be retained, and incorporate it within the boundaries of scripture that is acceptable. I think, Aswani, that's what I'd say on that question.
Yeah, first they came for our dancing, right? Then they came for our mourning and called us heathens. Stephen, you need to speak for your people, how the religiousization, there's no such word, but we are making it up, of death has robbed us as Africans, especially the ability to mourn and to just conclude death well and stop putting up a stiff upper lip. I was gonna say a Swahili word, but yeah, just go speak for your people. and also tackle the topic of how you would broach the topic of death. That was the initial question.
Okay. As you can tell from how the conversation is going, like, this is a very necessary conversation. And why I think it's very necessary, especially for Africa is highly multicultural, is extremely multicultural. Sometimes I'm really grateful that I am getting into this field here in the States. It's got its challenges, but I think it's actually easier because you have a situation where, for instance, in hospice, I'm dealing with older people who are dying, but at least they can all speak English, and I can speak English, so we can communicate. But if I was in Kenya, you're talking 40-something tribes, 40-something languages, maybe more. And most of the older people can't even speak that language, can't even speak any language apart from their mother tongue. So you're beginning to see the challenge that we are having. It's extremely difficult. So it is urgent for me. My heart goes out to Africa. It's urgent that we have these conversations and we begin taking practical steps towards having these conversations on death, dying, how issues of culture, spirituality, religion, modernization, all mingle, and really complicate the whole aspect of death. Because, for instance, someone dies in Nairobi, they have to be transported all the way to Kisii or to Bungoma, and you've got people traveling all the way there for the funeral and back. There's social issues, land issues, and stuff that have to be addressed. Saya just talked about culture of, building funeral homes, and not funeral homes like we know them maybe here or in the cities. This is a home that should have been your home, but since you're not living in your rural place, you construct a home that you will never live in, just so you can come and fulfill that final right of being buried on the right side of your house. Because it's a shame that you've died and you have no place to be buried. There's no house. So people spend a ton of money on resources that will never be used. And there's a land issue. We have the same culture in Kisii, and there's no land in Kisii, But because of that culture, and we cannot have these conversations, there's graves all over the place, and we are running out of land. We cannot reorder land, So I think it is urgent we have this conversation. Now, I like hospice chaplaincy, what I'm doing, because it is one of the few areas where there is a lot of teamwork. And it's been required by the government, because most of the hospice care is funded by the government here in the US. And I don't think it's a bad thing that we haven't made such progress in Africa, because even here in the US, hospice care is pretty new, Some of the legislations that went into hospice care were done in the early 80s, I think. So you can imagine, if this is how far the US has come, maybe many other countries are still way far behind, but we can catch up with time. But I like hospice because it's one of the few places where for every patient, you must have a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, and you could add any other caregiver, maybe like a CNA. And you must work together as a team. The nurse will do their assessment, the social worker will do theirs, I will do mine as a spiritual support person. We will do a note, just like also said, in the medical field, in the hospital, you have to write a note that every other medical caregiver can read. And I don't know if they always read these things in the hospital. I had a feeling that sometimes they don't.
I read them.
Really.
I read all. I read all of them, and there's like depth in the chaplaincy notes and the social worker notes. The most because of the way the system is here, it's rushed. But when I was hanging out with the respiratory team in the ICU, I read all those notes and discovered stuff that actually helps in the care of the patient. I wish more medics did that, but the training here is a bit different. Yeah, that's a topic for another day, but I read that.
Yeah, so it's nice. And for me, I used to read all the doctor's notes, you know, so I can merge my care with what's going on with the other team members. In the hospital, you don't really get to meet these people in person, but in the hospice, you actually have to meet and actually go through every patient's care plan. So you have a coordinated effort in how you're reaching out to this patient. So you don't have a scenario like where, for instance, like Asaf was saying, he's trying to be realistic, you know, as a medical doctor. You know, when you come into hospice, you're certified, you know, you've got 6 months at max if the illness runs its normal course. That's one condition that has to be certified before you can get into hospice care here. So it's a little easier to begin having those conversations because by the time someone comes into hospice, it's already clear, medically speaking, that there's very little that can be done, you know, curatively. So we are moving into comfort care, you know, and that direction. So it's a little easier, but I can understand where Asaf is coming from, you know, because of the lack of CPE training, clinical pastoral education training back home in Africa. Most of our pastors, like I'd say the difference between a pastor and a chaplain is pastors can be very evangelistic. So they come to a place where a doctor has explained to the patient and the family that you do not have much time, and he's trying to have these conversations, and the pastor absolutely has no idea even of what kind of illness is going on over here. And they come and they're just, you know, doing the thing they know how to do in the best way they know how to do, which is to give hope, but it ends up doing more harm than good. So we can begin having these conversations, and I think with time, it can be more coordinated. The beautiful thing about having a chaplain or spiritual care in hospice is one of the things we do when I go in to do like an assessment, for instance, I try to find out, okay, is this person plugged into a religious community, for instance, or a spiritual community? Do they have certain spiritual resources? Have they been attending maybe a certain church? I try, there's different ways I'll try to find out something like that. Are they comfortable, you know, working, for instance, with their pastors as opposed to me? If that is the case, then I would ask if they're comfortable with me, you know, coordinating with their pastors behind the scenes, so that the pastor is fully aware of what is going on, and whatever care he's coming to offer is coordinated with the hospice care team. So we are in harmony based on what we are doing. And he can even watch out for certain signs. He can go and see that this person has really declined and needs even more help. I need the pastor to feel free that they can call me as their fellow worker, you know, in the field. They can call me, and maybe I can call the nurse and let them know they need to check on this patient, or maybe even the doctor or something. So that's what we do. But it's work in progress, and I believe we can get there in Africa. But we need to get started, like, right away.
So Stephen, you and I and Jane are speaking from a point of privilege when you're talking about almost 10 providers to one patient. When I worked in rural Kenya, I was like the only person tending to this person, pray for them, open their stomach, you know, do everything. Asaf, this would be your question. What's the ideal situation? How do we marry the Stephen and I's side of the, and Jane's I's side of the, Jane and I's side of the world with the practicalities in Kenya? And how do we elevate the pastors who probably don't have a bachelor's degree and CPEs to come to the point of practicality, and where practicality and spirituality meet? And is this problem still, does it affect other religions? Are you seeing it in Islam and Hinduism, Baha'i faith, Dini ya Msambwa?
Yes, very interesting question. I think probably, even as a country, there is a bit of milestones in terms of improving access to hospice care, which even now will even include end of life. Last year, we launched the National Palliative Care Policy, which at least is addressing some of these concerns. And we, as a country, we are also now trying to integrate hospice care within the mainstream healthcare facility, so that at least if a patient is admitted, let's say in Vihiga sub-county hospital, you might have one or two individuals who are trained on hospice or palliative care and can be able to provide minimal support to this patient. Because the biggest challenge we have even in our setup is that we don't have enough human resource to be able to provide the care is being provided in the West. So even at where I work at the hospice, we don't have a full team. So we appreciate, yes, we need to have a doctor, a nurse, a chaplain, a social worker, but because these are most of the hospices are standalone institutions getting limited support from government. You'll mostly find most of the hospices have the doctor and the nurses, and these two cadres have to also fill the gap in terms of, in some instances, I have to attempt to be the chaplain, though I don't have that training, or you'll find the nurse being a counselor or a social worker and such. There's one of the things we also trying to do through the National Association is to try and target the religious bodies in terms of empowering the spiritual leaders, so that is they can also have aspects of end of life care knowledge and be able to appreciate the difference between religion and spirituality. Because I think religion mostly focuses on the practices within a certain religion, but in spirituality is focusing on an individual spiritual needs and addressing them based on their own religion. And actually through that approach is we are now starting to appreciate that even religious leaders who might not be able, who are not from a similar religion with the patient, can still be able to offer spiritual support to this individual. So you might find, let's say he's a Catholic priest, but is able to offer that support even to an Anglican, to a Dunia Musambwa, even attempt even to offer that support even to a Muslim personality. Different religions also have different practices. I find our Muslim brothers, sorry to say this, I find them I think they are more practical, but sometimes even more brutal as being practical, but I think they tend to help. Sometimes they end up supporting these individuals in a better way than sometimes how Christians we handle death and end of life. But different religions have different practices. Yeah, and we still have a long way to go to get to where you guys are at.
Okay. I want us to talk about the unhelpful stuff that we do when someone is dying or has been affected by death. From your end, what are the things that you found that are unhelpful? You know, like the way from the religious side, this quoting that it's all well, God desired for my person to go is very unhelpful. So I'm just wondering from your end, what has been unhelpful and what should we say do to support people, the families and friends who are affected by the death and the dying. And Jane, we will start with you.
That's a great question. I usually counsel people who contact me and say, you know, I have a relative or a sister or a brother who's sick. I don't know what to say. I want to support them. I encourage them to just, I'm here for you. And I like touch. And if you're that close, to hold people and hug them. And I caution them that if after they speak to someone, they feel better, then most likely they said something that made the grieving people feel worse, because it's uncomfortable to be with people in that vulnerable space. and it's supposed to be uncomfortable. So if you're going to say something like, well, at least they're in a better place, then you're making yourself comfortable at the expense of the pain of the other person, right? There's a doula in England who says that our inability to talk to bereaved and grieving people is a public health crisis. Like, wouldn't it be great if on the inside of every bathroom stall, it said like 3 things not to say to a grieving person and 3 things to say? So I just really encourage, I think I'm here for you. Or I don't know how you're feeling, but I would love to listen if you feel like talking about it. Just opening doors for people and really not going into any situation thinking that you can fix it or make it better.
Okay. Stephen, what have you found unhelpful from your end?
Well, for me, there's many things, but maybe I'll zone in on one. Most of the patients that we work with are elderly. And I come across patients of very many different spiritual backgrounds or beliefs, even religious or faith beliefs at the end of life. So for me, the most disturbing thing is the disrespect I see sometimes, especially coming from religious people, that you would tend to assume that if just because someone does not subscribe to the same beliefs that you have, that perhaps they're wrong and maybe you need to have an agenda, an emergency kind of agenda to try and help them, get to where you are before it's too late. I think it's crazy because, this is a person that has lived their whole life, for instance. They have had time to consider many things. They have done many things, they've said many things, they've had many things, they've studied many things. By the time someone is coming to the point where they say, well, I've got these questions about life, maybe I've got questions about, even the existence of God. And they're at the point of death. You've got to respect that. It is not my business to try and force them to come to my side to believe what I believe. I've got to hear them out and really believe that they have used their life well to get to that point where they are at that time. Like I had one person at one time, saying, found him. I went to visit him and found him, watching documentaries about space. And I like space and planets and galaxies out there. And we began having that conversation with him. And he told me, I'm kind of curious what is out there. I'm not too sure about God and everything, but I think I'm ready to have a conversation with him if he exists. And I thought that is a beautiful place to be. He is ready to have a conversation with God, even if he exists. He's looking at the sky, the galaxies and everything, well, we've been here on this earth. This is all we know. There's a ton out there. We hear there might be a God, there might not be. As a mathematician too, I have another degree in maths, we have no proof. That is the fact. We have evidence, but we don't have proof. Proofs are very rigorous, Maths is all about if you have evidence that can lead you to a certain kind of belief. So all we have to work with is evidence. So for me, it really frustrates me when people come as if there is proof. There is proof there's a God. There is just evidence. There is evidence, which for someone might look like there is proof. For someone else, there is a ton of evidence that there might not be a God, or there might be some questions, but they have not written off the whole fact that maybe he might be there. Like, well, I might be ready to have this conversation with him. So he is at such a place, and there's many other different scenarios. So just respecting that people have taken their time to get to where they are, I think is very critical and might be more helpful than trying to get people to move to where you yourself are, and you yourself want to be. And I might be like a 30-something-year-old, and I'm trying to force my own beliefs to a 90-something-year-old. I should actually listen. They've lived a longer life. They've had more time to process these things, and I need to respect that. So for me, that is the most frustrating thing, when I see that people at the point of death are not being respected for what they have come to believe life is, or death is for them at that point, having lived their full life. And I wish this was done more and more. And there's many other things, but maybe for me, that's the most frustrating thing.
Asaf, I know you've okay, Sarah, go ahead. Then Asaf, I know you've already said your pet peeve of giving hope when when the practical bit says no. You'll go after Sarah.
Yeah, no, just honestly, every time I think of that Asaf thing, I keep thinking of those guys who come and tell you, I decree and declare you will live. And Asaf is there nodding his head. I think I'll speak more from the historical, cultural thing. I find a few abusive things we're doing. One is our whole culture of expecting that the bereaved should feed us. I think is wrong. There's no other word for that. It's wrong. It's un-African, because the original African way, as I said, was fire was never lit in the home of the bereaved for the sake of cooking. Never. Food was brought from outside. But now we've turned our funeral, our death experiences, and often we are spending like a week or two to fundraise and still expecting to be fed and accommodated. So I think that's a strong. I think it should stop. I don't know how, but I think it'll need a few bold people beginning out, because it's taking $1 million, $2 million to put somebody in the ground. That shouldn't be. That money is needed more for the living, or at least to prevent death at the least. Then I think a second thing very closely related to that is these squabbles about succession, who takes which property, who does, who's going to be in charge of this and the other, that at times even begin while the person is still on the deathbed, and oftentimes begin immediately after the person dies, and widows and even at times widowers are being really bullied all over the place. So they no longer can focus on mourning or grieving, but they're trying to secure this and to try and secure the other. I think that's adding trauma and insult to somebody who's already grieving. So we're not too, what is it called? We're not too supportive on that. For that one, I think one of the preventative ways is, and I hope this discussion will bring it, is writing a will and having it enforced would be something that would help to cover for that. And then I think a third abusive thing I see is, and this one is often done well-meaning, is coming to the presence of the bereaved and using well-meaning but very unthoughtful words like, I feel you, or I know what you're going through, or coming with the assumption of what they need. I like the way Jen said, at times, the best gift you can give is silence. I know of a friend who was going through loss, who'd lost much. And she says that one of the best people who happened to her was a certain lady. She doesn't even know the lady, who would come faithfully every day and just sit next to her quietly. That was the best gift. So, and wordy people like me tend to run this risk the most. But I think that particular insensitive word said, even though well-meaning, tend to be one on other area of abuse. So I think for me, it's those three things: contest for property, the insensitive words that people say, and the whole ceremony and fanfare we've put around funerals and expect that the burden should be borne by the bereaved family. I think those are very insensitive things.
Asaf, go ahead. And meanwhile, if any of the panelists wants to take a stab at Sue's and Karl Marx's questions, please go, let me know. Asaf, go ahead.
Yeah, I think some of the unhelpful practices I've seen is that we really offer the gift of presence to the dying and to the bereaved family. And I think because also we people tend to assume they are busy with other things in their lives and they forget to offer that. That's the best gift, as Saya said, you can give to the patient and to the family. Yeah, and also just to emphasize on what Saya said, we also sometimes give issue very inappropriate statements. Sometimes people say it's a wheel of gold. And sometimes people say we are going to die. Those statements really don't even help and don't add value to the patient or to the family. Again, also we impose a lot of our values and practices into, and even sometimes even our traditions to the patient and to the family, and forget that it should actually be patient-led sort of a discussion. And we also, and these are cuts across both the patients and even cuts across both the carers and the medical practitioners, especially when the patient is very unresponsive, they are comatose, and in such situations, we tend to assume that they have lost all their senses, including the hearing senses. And we end up sometimes saying very nasty things about the patient, thinking they are not hearing. And we need to appreciate that hearing is one of the senses that takes time to sort of disappear. And therefore we need to be very cautious in terms of the things we will say to the patient and even to the family. And then finally, we also don't acknowledge death, even when it's very imminent. And therefore that hinders us providing the required support to the dying and to the family.
Oh, thank you. And I want us to just shift a bit to the taboo subjects, the difficult deaths of children, broaching the subject to children, death. I mean, the mothers who've lost their children in the womb, mothers who've lost their journey in IVF, even at the early stages, mothers who've procured abortions legally or illegally, people who've died through overdose, death by suicide, and death occasioned by others. Like if you were doing drugs with someone and you gave someone cocaine laced with fentanyl and they died. How do we approach all this, the taboo deaths, like the ones from your experience? How do you talk to people? How do you talk to the ones left behind? How do you talk to children? How do you talk to let me give you an example. Like there's a huge substance use disorder amongst the Somali community here. And when they die from a drug overdose, the mothers don't say that it was a drug overdose. They say the child died of a heart attack because of the stigma attached to it. And it's a big issue. And because the drug use disorder has crept into the whole East African community, not just the Somali community. But how do we discuss these taboo deaths, and how do we comfort the people affected by it? And Jane, I don't know if you've experienced, how do you broach that? How do you talk about it?
You know, I don't have experience with those kinds of deaths, although I do believe the principles of presence and listening are comforting no matter what the circumstances. But I don't have specific tools for those instances.
Okay, Stephen, because you've been on this side for a while and you've seen it, especially in the ICU, the young people before COVID that we got were basically drug use disorder. Okay, from my experience here in the Twin Cities.
Well, can I just try and answer one question on the chat first before I
go ahead? Thank you. Go ahead.
I see there's a question by Karl Marx here, and I think it's a really valid question. He says, at one point he said, I've met someone who was in hospice, but prayers made a difference for him. And then, so just want to ask the question as a preacher, at what point do you stop giving hope based on the experience I shared above? So very valid question. There's certain conditions that allow someone to stay in hospice care. These people are monitored continuously. And the key condition is that, medically speaking, if the illness runs its normal course, we don't expect the person to live, beyond 6 months. Sometimes they die faster than that. Sometimes they stay longer than that. But there's also an option to opt out of hospice care. And one of the ways you can opt out of hospice care, or you can actually be dropped from hospice care, is when you improve. So there's an acknowledgement of the fact that sometimes there might be an improvement. And truth be told, yes, sometimes, and there's studies that have been shown that spirituality helps, with the whole immune process and coping process for some people, and can improve sometimes the whole quality of life. And there's healing, miraculous healing that sometimes can happen, and people can get better. As a pastor, I've seen that happen. I wouldn't want to deny that completely. So yes, there's people who have come out of hospice care, but it is not the norm. It is not the norm. We need to appreciate the skill and the expertise of the medical fraternity when they say, man, it's getting to an end. It is getting to an end. And I think this is also biblical, even for pastors. There's, just like Solomon says, there's a time to live, there's a time to die. We need to accept the fact that there's a time to die. Even with the case of, let's say, the most faithful person in the scriptures, Jesus Christ, when his time to die came, he actually prayed, Father, if it be your will, take this cup away from me. And no, it could not be taken away from him. And what does the scripture say? It says after that, there appeared an angel to strengthen him. And the angel, the word angel is angelos, basically means messenger. There appeared a messenger to strengthen him. To strengthen him for what? For the time of death, the time of crisis. So as pastors, I think it is very biblical to be realistic that sometimes, no matter how faithful you have been, I don't think you can be more faithful than Jesus. This is biblical. You might have to face death and suffering. And sometimes all we can do is actually be the messenger, that God would use to actually help this person find the strength they need to go through a very, very difficult time. And that's why we appreciate people like Jen, being a death doula. That's what she does. I mean, being there to just, and sometimes that strengthening is just holding their hand. I was at one point we were visiting this patient with a social worker, and I was pretty new, starting hospice work, and she had a little more experience, and she kind of noticed, this person is almost at the end of life. And with time, as you do these things, you actually begin noticing. And he was almost cut off from his whole family and all. And she actually realized this person needs a hug. Said, do you want me to give you a hug? I said, yeah, please. Gave him a hug. And guess what? Right after we left, he died. That's what he needed. He needed that kind of strength for that last step. And I think for my fellow pastors who are maybe here and listening, it is okay to acknowledge the fact that death is coming. Death is coming, and we can help people find strength for that. Now, back to the other more difficult question that now we are trying to get into. We're just scratching the surface. Death, the issues of death are just so complicated, so heavy. I mean, here, and what you're raising is complicated deaths. These are complicated deaths. There's resources to help people deal with this, professional resources. One of the things I'm trying to do right now is pursue a course that will help me be a certified grief counselor. And you kind of have to get training on different areas of grief counseling. If it's children, adolescents, complicated deaths like what you're saying, there's training for that. I'm still growing in that area, but I know there's tools and resources that are available. And this is one of the things that led me into this field, because I realized it's completely, well, there's maybe some resources, but very rarely would someone even have access to them. And especially back home in Africa. Hopefully, some of us might come back later on and try to help with the whole process there. So yeah, it's difficult. And my experience here has shown me that the drug overdose issue is a real crisis. For instance, at the hospital, when I was working at the hospital, almost every single day, we would have a drug overdose case, at the ER. And these are very sad cases because you have very young people, 17, 16, 17, 18-year-olds dying, and these are very hard deaths to deal with. And it doesn't just affect their family. What I noticed, it even affects the medical staff at the ER. It does. When they see young people, people don't just say, "I know he's just a young man who's wasted his life." No, it's a sad crisis. And I think we need to get to the point where we can talk about some of these taboo subjects. For me, this is part of what led me into this journey. Like I said, my case was also another difficult case of grief, where a brother I really loved, my only brother, had a very difficult situation, and he did not have resources to deal with his situation. And he dealt with it the only way he knew how, which is ending his life, ending the pain, ending the suffering. And that left me and the rest of the family in a very difficult spot. So you realize there's not too many resources to help you deal with this thing. Now, first of all, in Africa, it's hard to talk about death sometimes. And then couple that with a taboo kind of death, a taboo kind of death. So nobody wants to talk about how do you cope with suicide, for instance. We don't even have those conversations, but our kids are dying of these things. How do we stop this from happening? Do we have a suicide line that somebody can just call, free of charge? If you're in crisis, just call this number, and there's a professional on the other end who can speak with you and help you through that crisis. I remember personally, after burying my brother in Kisii, for those of you who know Kisii, it's hilly. Some friends came, to comfort me, and we decided to take a walk up the hill, go all the way up to the hill and just chill over there and just take a look. When we were getting close to the top of the hill, there's this person who was leaving there, and he saw us walking up, and he talked to some of my friends who were ahead of me. They said, did you guys come from the funeral that's going on down there? Yeah, they said yes. So he said that he's heard what has happened, and he actually vented or voiced his thoughts about that, not knowing that I was the brother who was there. Like, if that kid did that, then I think they should not even have brought him home to bury him. They should have burned him or something, and just disposed of him. And you can imagine, I am there. I am hearing. This is the kind of attitude our community has. And it got me thinking, what if this was your own son? Would you say the same thing? What if this was your own brother? Would you say the same thing? So I guess one of the ways to approach a very complicated death is from a relational perspective for me. To think of it first and foremost from a relational perspective. This was a person. This is a person. This is someone's most beloved, And when you start thinking about it that way, then you become very sensitive. Whether they did a drug overdose, they're not just any other drug addict. They're someone's daughter, someone's most beloved daughter, someone's son, someone's father that just died. If they got shot, gunshots are a crisis in the South. I don't know about many other states. In the South where I was, every single day, people being brought in for gunshots. You wouldn't just look at them as criminals. This is somebody's husband, somebody's wife, maybe somebody's child. And when you you look at these people like that, then you approach the situation with a lot of compassion, a lot of thoughtfulness. And that mitigates the kind of harm you are able to do or you can do in such situations. And you might be even more helpful. But there's resources that are available. Here, I think America has made tremendous progress in trying to outline these things and even help people get certification that they need, the education and the certifications they need. For me, I'm trying to acquire, I'm still in the process of acquiring those. And maybe in future, try to see how we can get to do this even back home, because I think this is very necessary, especially back home.
Okay. And let me get this from the HIV pandemic point of view. I mean, and we suffered a lot as Kenyans. As in my rotation in clinic in medicine, medicine itself was just basically every day was, and that this was the early 2000s, was basically just certifying people dying from HIV until we stopped thinking about it as a curse and got antiretrovirals, and we were able to stem the tide, as in people are living with HIV for a very long time, and I think there's a vaccine on its way, because we found the cause of the disease and stopped blaming the curses and all that stuff, and we addressed the root cause. I'm thinking of the way death by suicide was handled, especially in my community. I know, like, if you, and I'm sorry, I didn't, it could be a trigger for some of you, Stephen, even you. If you died by suicide through hanging, your body was flogged, like you were flogged wherever you were hanging. And the rope had to be burned so that the cast can leave the homestead. And I think you were buried unceremoniously. So we've inherited that kind of mentality, if despite Christianity, despite modernization. And like you said, we can only change these thoughts through education, through sharing our experiences, and just being better, doing better than when you know better, you do better and you teach others. And I think that's many of the reasons I started this forum is for us. We know better, we do better, and we need to give hope to everyone. Let's go to Asaf, and then the next round, because we've done 1.5, is now that you've been surrounded by death, what do you have a plan? And we can discuss the will part, and let's give hope to everyone, so that we don't leave here just feeling hopeless and gloomy. Yeah. We need to live to die. So we need hope for the living, so that eventually when we die, we've given it all. So Asaf, just on the taboo deaths, do you have a comment? And then we go to the next round as we wind up. Yeah.
Yeah, the taboo deaths are they're hard to deal with. Personally, I also have a lot of challenges in terms of supporting families, the bereaved family, after they have experienced that sort of death. As Africans, and I think as Kenyans, we are very brutal. And with the technology, with the social media, sometimes when you have these taboo deaths that happen, sometimes distant relatives actually come to learn of that death through social media, even before they could get full picture of what transpired and such. And that causes a lot of emotional distress to the family. One of the things we think as Africans we need to try and do is also now approach, we need to be more concerned before even we open our mouths or before even put a post. We need to remember, appreciate that there are family members who are hurting and we need to be supported. We also need to encourage families to seek counseling whenever they experience this sort of taboo death, so that they can be able to heal and move on. There's a lot of stigma in all cultures, I guess, in Kenya, regarding taboo death. But and I think it's an area that we really need to put a lot of emphasis on. Yeah, there is a lot of, I think for us, every day when you're watching news, they are almost sort of a taboo death on a daily basis. Probably a mother has decided to kill herself and her kids, or a husband has decided to wipe out his family and such. So it's an area that requires our support and attention.
And I think also the HR department, I know my friend Zula is here, and the HR departments in Kenyan companies need to think through this and give adequate time off to grieve, especially for, I know, like when I used to do the rota for the clinic, anyone who lost a baby, or I used to give time off, like you are on maternity leave, and of course I got bad eyes. I hope the HR departments are considering grief as a whole thing and giving time off to mourn and not stressing the people around them. So let's go to exactly what are you doing to prepare for your death, and a hopeful word of encouragement for the rest of the team and for anyone else who's listening. Jane, as usual, we'll start with you.
Well, I think there's been a lot of discussion about hope, and in my work, I see that it isn't until people give up hope for a recovery or a miracle that this other door is opened toward, I think dying, the experiencing of dying is a transformational experience. And I see time and time again how as people's physical body gets more weak and it's like the death of their ego, and their spiritual self rises and they become kinder, more open people who are available or able to fix some of the mistakes that they've made in their life. And I think if you keep looking at a cure and you're hoping only for a cure, you lose that opportunity of allowing yourself to sort of soften. So I just don't want, like, when we lose hope for a cure, there is hope for other things. There's hope for a peaceful death. There is hope for reconciliation. Rumi says, he has this story of a salt doll where this doll made of salt is heading or walking across the desert, has never seen the ocean, and sees the ocean for the first time and says, "What are you?" And the ocean says, "Come in and find out." And so the salt doll walks into the ocean, and as it walks in, it's being dissolved to its essential nature. And the salt doll finally says, "Now I know what I am." I feel like that can be the dying experience if you are totally open to it. And I don't want to be Pollyanna about, how great dying is, but I do feel like it's an essential part of our development as human beings to go through that process and to allow ourselves to be altered by it. As far as how do I prepare myself for death, I'm sure this is true with everybody. When you are with dying people every day, you have an appreciation for the very simplest things, like being able to walk outside under a beautiful sky, or being able to experience eating food, or all these things about it, being human and having a body and just being grateful and being in the moment. And always saying this could be the last time for everything. I feel like being a death doula has only made my life better.
Stephen, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Hope and how you're preparing for death. And also the topic of wills, Sue, we covered it also during the dementia talk. I can give you a link to it. We had 2 lawyers, so they did a better job than we would do because we are not in that field. So I'm going to send you the link.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So before maybe I answer that question, let me take another question. I think one of the first questions that came in on the chat. How do you deal with your emotional health after seeing so many losses? So I found CPE training really helpful because one of the things that it helps you identify, it takes you through a journey of self-awareness. So you're able to be aware of many, many different things. For instance, some of the triggers and what those do to you. Then it also helps you, work out self-care methods. Just realize that where you are is not an easy place. It can affect you. So you need to take care of yourself. And how do you do this? And you have to find practical ways to do that. And one of the most practical ways is working very closely with a team, your team at your workplace or somewhere. Maybe for someone like Jane who has a business, I don't know how you do this, but maybe just make your whole business, your whole team, a really close family. And the reason for this is sometimes you can come across a very stressful, difficult circumstance that will make you unable to work for the rest of the day. Case in point, I'm remembering one of the cases I had in South Carolina. Go there in the morning and kid gets brought in, and it's a young kid, and they shot themselves in the parking lot of the school early morning. So they just got dropped off in school, and they had a gun, and then they got out of the car. The parent drove off, and he went to the middle of the parking lot where the whole school was sitting and shot themselves. And this kid is brought into the hospital. You can imagine what a crisis that was, even at the hospital, not just the school, the hospital, the parent having to be told about this, having to drive back to the hospital, a kid you just dropped into school. It was such a crisis. By the time you're done with that, you're done with handling the situation at the ER. You have media, you have the police, you have investigative child fatalities, all these things happening at the same time. When you're done, there's absolutely no way you can go to 6th tower or 7th tower or another floor and start seeing patients again. So the only way that you'll be able to handle this is if you have a very supportive team that understands what you just went through, what you just handled. For me, for instance, in that case, I was very thankful because I had a boss who had heard what was going on down at ER. When I showed up, it was just like, Steve, go home. Go home. Just take up your things. This has been very hard. Take the rest of the day off. And I was grateful for that. So, and I've seen that also here with hospitals. So we had a team, for instance, of chaplains that we would work very closely with. And if you find something overwhelming, they would come on board and support you. And sometimes even step in and do some of your work for you until you're able to get back on board to the point where you're able to do this again. Same thing even here in hospice. We try to work very closely with the rest of the team, check in on each other. Monday mornings, for instance, the whole team checks in on each other. What did you do over the weekend, for instance, just to make sure that we're doing some of the meaningful things in life apart from just dealing with death. For me, family is very critical. Other hobbies, for instance, just going out to the lake, going out to the mountain for a hike or something. So just nurturing those hobbies. And for Africa, I think this is critical because for Africa, many of us grew up where you're being told hobbies is wasting time. No, nurturing hobbies, no. Just keep reading your books and studying and what. No, those hobbies can be life-saving, let me tell you. So whatever hobbies you're having, whether painting, whether soccer, whether whatnot, those things are very useful. So it's, for me, I try to identify what are mine and really plunge myself into those whenever I can. How I'm preparing for my own death. I am trying to learn as best as I can from what I have seen working with dying people. I have come to realize that, many of us think that at the end of life, the thing that is top of the mind of a person that's dying is, how do they stand with God? It is that, you'll be surprised, that's a question that is very far from the mind of someone who's dying. For most people who are dying, like, what is their standing? How is it going to be between them and God? Usually what I've come to find out at the end of life, most people think about not even themselves. They're mostly concerned about their family, their loved ones, how they're going to carry on after that, and whether they made the best of their times with these people. That's usually the biggest thing for me I have seen. So for me, it's a lesson to try and spend as much time with the people that mean the most to me. My little girls, I've got two very beautiful little girls. My family, just spend enough time. I don't mind going out there to the park and just playing with them. You know, those are the most precious moments in life. I want to give them, you know, for instance, the very best. These kids literally adore you and stuff, you know. So being there for them when you can, I think is one of the best ways to actually prepare for my own death, because I don't want to look back and regret that, hey, I wish I was there, you know, I wish I did this. I wish I did more of a certain thing that I did not do. I don't want to have too many regrets. Another thing, I'm trying to appreciate life as much as I can. I've learned that also from caring for the dead, the dying, I mean, and their families. I've come to realize that life is full of privileges. And these privileges may be as simple as the weather you have, you know, the ability to go out and take a walk. I had a person who, for instance, one of his hobbies was, you know, boats. But he was in a facility and he couldn't go out to his boat. So how would he cope with the situation? He would dream. He would just sit there, close his eyes and dream of himself going out there, you know, into the lake with his sailboat. And that would give him joy. Have you ever realized what a privilege it is to be able to just dream? You know, so for me, small things like that, I try to take advantage of that and, you know, just make the best of it. That's how, for me, I'm preparing, I think, for my death. I'm trying not to complain of what I don't have, but just to make the best of what I have at this time. America is a place of privilege, of great privilege, but when you're in America and on a daily basis, you're dealing with dying people in America, you're dealing with people who are losing all the privileges that this country can offer. But you've got someone in Africa, for instance, who's got life. Do you know these guys can trade? If there was any way they could move from the US and continue living, they would move, you know? So it is all about appreciating where you are and making the best of this time. So for me, that's how I do it. You know, if I have money, fine. If I don't, that's okay. For as long as I have life, I have strength, just make the best of it. Enjoy life to the fullest. It's a privilege. When you're dead, it's no longer there. So I'm enjoying life. That's how I'm preparing for it. I don't want any regrets.
I'm also enjoying life, and everyone I know knows where to take me when I die. My friends complain because I told them I want to be cremated, and everywhere I walk, my ashes to be scattered. And my friend told me, you walk too many places, we're gonna get tired. That's how comfortable I am talking about death. But yeah, let's enjoy life. Asaf, do you have what's the same question, and then we can wind up by the panelists asking each other questions, and then I'll move to the post show. It's a thing we started, like the unrecorded version where people just speak up their mind, and we can talk about the topics that are coming up in next week in March. So Asaf, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. For me, okay, I appreciate that death will happen. I'm not very sure when. I figured out what sort of rituals I would want to appreciate or receive. I've actually even discussed this with relatives and friends that probably my funeral should, if I die, I should actually only spend 3 days in a morgue. The budget should not exceed a certain amount. And actually, even the whole ceremony should be probably about an hour or two. And even for me, I don't believe being buried in ancestral land. So any cemetery nearby is good enough. So at least those are some of the things I encourage even other people just to express their wishes during when they are having family time or they're having a discussion with their friends. So at least people are able then also to start appreciating that it's going to happen. I think maybe just also to encourage everyone is that even as a country, we are moving towards appreciating end of life. As I said, we have a policy that was launched last year. We are setting up through the support from the Ministry of Health and other stakeholders. We have about 70 or so palliative care institutions, be it hospices or palliative care units within different parts of the country. So at least that would be able to help in terms of supporting patients and families. And also we are engaging legal practitioners and policymakers to come up with the required documents, and especially towards end of life, like advanced directive, will lighting, and even do not resuscitate sort of documentation. So there's a bit of progress, and we believe if we continue with the same momentum in the next 5 years, we'll be able to have more facilities and be able to support patients and families in a better way.
Thank you. The amount of cement down here that's surrounding dead people, dead bones now, can take us to the moon and back. The amount of timber down here that's was used to bury us I don't know how many buildings it can build. So when you're considering your death, consider the resources we are wasting down there in terms of being buried. I'm just encouraging you to think of other modes of being buried. Yes. So do the panelists have questions for each other? And Saya, do you have like the same way you start? Do you have like a nice, neat way of tying this up? But the panelists can ask. Jane, do you have a question for Stephen and Asaf?
Well, this is a funny question, but the houses that people build so they can be buried to the left or the right, are they all together or are they scattered all around?
Let me just answer that. So Jane, a typical African homestead, okay, like my community and a few other, the Luo, there's a very specific order how the homestead is built. So when you approach the gate, the main entrance, the house that has the door facing direct to the main gate, that's a main house. So the main house gate faces the official, door faces the official gate. So
this is in upcountry Kenya, not in Nairobi.
This is in upcountry Kenya. This is rural Kenya, not town, not the cities. And then there's a specific order after that. The firstborn son builds on the right of the house, of the main house. The secondborn son builds on the left, the thirdborn son on the right. So it alternates that way. So when it comes to burial, the father of the homestead, the main house, is buried to the right of his house. The wife is buried to the left of her house, unless they have stated they want to be buried together, in which case it would be probably on the right side.
And then, so depending on what you are in life, like because I am a medical trained person, I'm supposed to have like a flamboyant house. I'm not supposed to have a grass thatched. Yeah, so for showbiz business, people have to come and say, because my body has to lay in state inside the house that that has been built. And that is the sole purpose of people, especially here, who will never go back to settle in Kenya, are doing. They're just having a show house, and they're haciendas, as my friend said. They're magnificent pieces of architecture that people will just be carried from in the cargo of KLM Delta and be shipped to another Shinamwenyuli, all the place in Kakamega, and so that people can see this is the house that the deceased built. It's only for that purpose. After that, cobwebs and wild animals live in those things. It's a waste of resources. We need to stop doing it.
And then you have an elaborate home funeral where the body is laid out in the home and people come
and yeah, because my community, we have to view you from head to toe. We have to view all of you and make sure all the parts, believe me, all the parts are within you, and we have to see how you're dressed and all that stuff. So this is just for the people who've been left behind to just see and not gossip after about you.
So we can't have a closed casket burial in my.
Yeah, we only have
unless you're burnt beyond recognition.
Yeah, we don't have close. Our community doesn't have closed casket. Shiko's community has passport, as in you only see the face, and that's in the morgue. We cannot do it as a community. We can't. It doesn't happen. We see you at the morgue. We see you at church. We open the whole casket in the house. Before you go into the grave, the pastor asks, has anyone not seen? So it's very elaborate. It's a lot. Yeah.
And I don't want to make you do all your customs, but are people comfortable companioning someone through the dying process?
Yeah,
like neighbors helping neighbors, family helping family.
Yes. It initially the culture was to do that, but because of a bit of influence from other communities and the West, the burden has been shifted to the family. So like if anyone in my particular, like our family dies, we are gonna have that burden on us, because we are a bit well-to-do than our neighbors. So no one is going to help us. And we know that.
Because I frequently will meet people who are 80 years old. And one of the first questions I say is, what is your experience with death and dying? And it is not infrequent for them to say 0. They have never been with someone through the dying process. They've never seen a dead body. And the anxiety is unfathomable. So in that way, you're light years ahead of us.
Yes, my community has too much experience with death and dying, a bit too much. I think we need to tone it down.
Okay. I don't know what the machometer is, like the measure for match, but that's interesting. I think I have a question for each of the panelists. So beginning with Jane, how do you reconcile the service you give? I believe it is not for free. So how do you reconcile the fact that you will charge for it? And do you find people who say, the reason I need you, but I can't afford you? And how do you deal with any ethical, moral considerations? That's my question to Jane. My question to Steve is around the theology of death, the whole bit of telling people to mourn with hope, and especially if, I'm not just talking about the weird death, I'm talking about somebody who's died from diabetes, but you clearly can see this was a case of somebody who dug their grave with a spoonful at a time. How do you, and the people around them, this guy is obese and it's not like genetic or anything. This person ate their way to an early death and stuff like that. How do you normally deal with that with the people who are remaining, who are aware and people don't want to, and how do you conduct such a funeral service where there's a lot of things to pussyfoot around? So I've used diabetes as one example, but hey, there could be many more examples. It could be a case of somebody was killed in a love triangle, or not necessarily the weird death that Posa has talked about. Then the Asaf, a very interesting name. My question to Asaf is around making that, you work in a hospice. How do you normally deal with people who they're terminally ill, there's nothing to be done for them, when they have to make that decision for, do we keep this person at our facility or do we take them home? How do you help them deal with moral and all those kind of issues that come around with those? I think those would be my questions to each panelist. And they can be answered in the order asked: Jane, then Steve, then Asaf.
Hey, good questions. I didn't know I was supposed to be thinking of questions, but that's a great question that you ask, and one I struggled with. When I ran my own business, I basically had a sliding fee scale for $30 to $50 an hour, and every single doula does it differently. Some people do it donation only, and then the people who pay a lot of money sort of naturally subsidize the people who can't pay any money. But I think a fair number of doulas, and I think this is true, charge a lot. And it feels sort of like a boutique death experience. Like, you know, if you can afford it, you can do all these projects around death. And, you know, I'm a much more practical doula. Thankfully, I currently work at a skilled nursing facility that is a nonprofit that has very many people who are completely indigent and out of money. And that feels good to me, that I can be of service to people who wouldn't normally get it. But your question, I think, is something that the movement will have to reckon with, because right now it seems like a movement by white people for white people. And I think some cultures are very intact and they don't need a death doula, like the Hmong culture. They care for their own, they have their rituals, it is complete. So, you know, the death doula movement is sort of for people who have no culture around death, in some part. I hope that's mildly helpful.
I wish people really met the Hmong. Like, the Hmong, for you to conduct any surgical procedure on them is very difficult because they don't believe in interference. When they know they're dying, someone comes and dresses them in the Hmong attire and all that stuff, and they deal with the whole shebang. It's actually, it's a mixture of frustration and beauty, because some of the conditions they refuse to do procedures for are treatable. But the way they handle the death and the care of the body, and that gown is beautiful, is awesome. I'll talk to my friend Chengcha to come and just talk about the Hmong death. It's actually beautiful. Someone has asked me, Jane, how do you help people who've experienced multiple deaths? Like, one of our friends has experienced, like, I think they're over 10 deaths in like 2 years. It's been a lot for her. Yeah, how do you help them?
You know, I talk a lot about how do we nurture our grief, because it's really easy to compartmentalize it and put it in the spot so we can do our regular life. But you have to make time to give space to that grief. And especially when there are multiple events, it's just stacking up inside you. So when people die at our facility, I give them a candle and I give them some like hot tips about grief. Like, it's exhausting, take care of yourself, get outside, you know, how do you survive grief? But I give them a candle and I explain how to make a memorial space in your home with flowers and pictures and maybe objects that person likes. And the Buddhists do that, and for 50 days, and every time they pass the memorial space, they send a good like a prayer for their safe passage. So that's a way to nurture your grief. It's the spot in your house where you are remembering it and thinking about it. And maybe if the person liked wine, you set aside time, you pour a glass of wine for them, you pour a glass of wine for yourself, you play their music, you talk to them, you write them songs, you write them poems and letters, you know, activities to think about it. Because I think with each new grief, and I tell people this, it creates a fissure, like a crack in your sort of you're protecting yourself from the grief. So you create this crack and then you're allowed to grieve other opportunities. So if your mother dies and you're sad about that, all of a sudden you will be grieving other losses that you've had, maybe from long ago, because you've created this route for your grief to come to the surface, if that makes sense. So I do a lot about grief education and opportunities to nurture grief, because I describe grief as like a shy little animal in the woods that you have to create quiet and peace and calm for those feelings to come to the surface. You cannot expect them to come to the surface while you're having a busy day and preoccupied with other stuff, if that makes sense.
Stephen, I think you can answer Saya's question if you remember it.
Yeah, just the merging of the theological and the realities of life. This is it's interesting that actually many things, you'd be surprised, many things just by reasoning you can come to the same conclusion as the scriptures. Like for instance, one of the things I talked about for instance the dead or the dying thinking about their family more than anything.
Why are you doing that?
More than even thinking about their relationship with God. You'd be surprised that first and foremost, that looks like the same thing God is concerned about. If you look at the Old Testament, how the Old Testament ends, God literally says, before the last day, I will send you a messenger, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Why would God curse the earth? Because of failing family relationships. And as the New Testament opens, it opens with God immersing himself into our family relationships. He calls himself our Father, calls Jesus his Son, so those relationships are very critical. And this is just talking from one faith tradition. So something like that. And sometimes people miss these things in the scriptures, and it becomes very difficult when you're dealing with someone that is not coming from that same faith tradition, or maybe seeing things differently. Now, back to the question of, let's say somebody has died of something that looks like it was their own fault. Maybe a disease, a lifestyle disease, so to speak, or maybe they got caught in a love triangle, like you said. I think the first thing to realize is that these things are more complicated than they may look like at the surface. It is not right to put a blanket condemnation on everything, because circumstances can be very complicated. It's good to just look at specific cases and what led to that. You'd be surprised. Something like diabetes might, as much as it's a lifestyle disease, it might just affect somebody just because maybe they changed environments, and before you knew it, the food in the place where you were was so sugary you didn't even know about it. So it was not even your fault, and suddenly before you know it, you have it. Love triangle. Have we addressed maybe the issues of, okay, why did this person even leave to go to another place? What kind of frustrations were they dealing with in their marriage? It's not just a matter of, they cheated and they deserved it. It's more complicated than that. And when I look at the scriptures, I see God dealing with people from a very personal level, a very individual level. He's a very personal God, the Christian God, the Christian perspective. So he tries to address these things based on your individual circumstances. So what we might end up doing the same thing, what looks like the same thing on the surface, but get judged very differently. Here's a classic case. Cutting off someone's foot, is that wrong or right? Well, the question is, or the answer is, it depends. Why was the foot cut? If you have to say it was wrong, totally wrong, you might be at fault. Why? Because what if it was a life-saving intervention by a doctor? to save the life of this person. That's why they amputated the foot. In that case, it becomes right. But in another case, let's say I kicked you and you decide to cut off my leg, then justice doesn't demand you do that. And when we look at things at such a detailed level, then you'd realize there's something we call grace, you know, and compassion and understanding that can be applied to every single particular case. So worst case scenario, let's say somebody just ate cupcakes and whatever, ice cream and whatnot, they just loved it. And fine, they're on their dying bed now. I will not come and start condemning them or even preach against that in their funeral. Why? Because this person, though they did a great big mistake, for instance, if at all it's a mistake, they deserve grace. That's what the scriptures tell me. That's what the Bible tells me. It tells me all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So his sin, which was eating too many cupcakes, too much ice cream, might be nothing compared to mine, which is not evident. He deserves grace as much as I deserve grace. So I would totally avoid, a subject that would, addressing a question like that at that point. That may not be the right forum, because you're dealing with grief at that point. You're dealing with death, you're dealing with pain and sorrows. Those are the issues that we would address, and maybe talk about lifestyle changes maybe later on for those who are left behind. For us here at Hospice, we offer a full year of bereavement support and counseling for the families after the death has happened. So we would probably address some of these things as time goes ahead, whenever it is appropriate, but not at that time. And I think it is biblical and scriptural, and that's just talking from the Christian perspective. And I'm sure any other faith tradition or spiritual tradition would have its own way of approaching these things in a reasonable manner that would not cause unnecessary consternation and and concern for the family at a time when they're dealing with the hardest thing. You yourself said the luya, when you're circumcised, it's even without anesthesia, but when someone dies, you cannot afford to not shed a tear. So there is the realization that death is such a heavy thing, it's such a difficult thing. And I think at that point, we can let some things slide. We can let some things slide for the meantime and just address that pain at that point.
I think from the Christian perspective also, the biggest story of grace in our love triangle is the story of David and Uriah. Uriah died from in a love triangle that David instigated, and yet God calls David a man after his own heart. And when the book of 1 Samuel is about to end, when the accomplishments of David are put there, he doesn't put his children, he puts his soldiers, and Uriah makes the cut. I think people just need to read the Bible a bit better, and grace, and grace. Asaf, did Sai have a question for you? Or Sai, could you just go ahead, and then after this, I think we can. I'll stop the Facebook Live so that people can feel anger free and just ask questions.
Yeah, yes, I think the question is on moral issues on end of life. And there are a lot of concerns from family when their loved one is sort of referred to hospice in terms of elements of feeling like they are neglecting their loved one or not giving the best care. And also there's sometimes also their sense of guilt. Most of the people would want, when obituary is being written of their loved one, they say he died in the best hospital, receiving the best care with the best, maybe the top-notch consultant being the lead doctor. But what we try to do is help the families first appreciate their loved one wishes. And most of there's actually a survey we did sometimes back, asking even people on the streets, if you are too sick and you're about to die, would you like to die in hospital or would you like to die at home? And surprising, the majority of the people who participated in the SARS survey, they said that they would actually want to die at home with their loved one. And even when you ask the families about their loved one wishes, and especially to us of life, they say, yes, my grandfather, my mother has stated clearly that they don't want to continue receiving care in hospital. They don't want probably even intensive treatment. And therefore we try to help them appreciate that wish and be able to also help them to be able to actualize it. So how we do it is to ensure that we are there to offer any clinical support or psychological support, so that the family, they don't feel like they are walking this journey alone, because I think that's mostly what causes a lot of fear. So when they know there's a team of professionals supporting them and guiding them, most of the time they're able then to allow their loved one to receive care at home and not feel like they are neglecting them and such. So, but I still believe there's still a long way to go in terms of empowering communities, because even in some instances, I have counseled patients and families. We have all agreed that the patient needs to receive care at home, and even educated them on signs and symptoms of death. And when those symptoms kick in, you will find patients calling, family calling you and saying, our loved one, I think, is dying and we are on our way to hospital. And I ask them, so what do you want to achieve as you move to hospital? And you realize sometimes it's just the panic that, because again, most of the time, I think from our culture perspective, we really don't want to have a dead body in our homes, and especially when it has already just happened. So it's also that cultural aspect, but I think with continuity, empowerment and awareness creation, people are starting to appreciate the need for sort of home-based care and such. And I think even COVID has also helped to affirm this, because with more beds being occupied by active, very sick patients, and sometimes you find, even if you want your loved one to be nursed in the hospital, there is no bed space. So you still have limited options and you have to embrace alternatives. But it's a discussion that will continue supporting. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen and Asaf, did you have questions for Jane and Saya?
Myself, I think I have a question for Asaf. And Asaf, thank you for being here with us today. I mean, really enriching this discussion. Now, my question is, you know, being a medical doctor yourself and having worked in palliative care, and you look like you really understand these issues, you know, one of my concerns has always been, we have seen the kind of trend where doctors in Kenya especially would take to the very last coin, you know, of the family. And sometimes I tend to feel, I might be wrong in this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I tend to feel that they are aware that aggressive treatment and interventions are futile, but they would still take the money, you know, from the parents. And they know, you know, the financial situation of the family is not that good. So you have a case where someone has died, they have a huge bill left, you know, with the hospital. The interventions they were receiving were not even going to help in the first place. Now they have to commit their titles with the hospital so they can get the body out. And then you leave a whole family that's, you know, not now just grieving, but it's in serious financial ruin, you know. And hospitals may, you know, hold on to that, the only thing that they have, you know, their land, until this is paid. So you have a whole community now coming together, and M-Pesa till numbers, you know, are being sent even all the way up to here abroad and stuff, contribute so we can get somebody buried. At what point would doctors, you know, begin having this conversation with patients and let them know that, hey, we have reached this point where we think aggressive treatment is futile, and you as a family need to have this conversation on when to end, you know, aggressive treatment and move into comfort care. Are we having those conversations happening right now in Kenyan hospitals? Are we seeing an intentional move towards helping families, you know, get to that point where their family members die with dignity, but they are also not ripped off financially, so to speak, when it was obvious that this would not have been something that's treatable, you know, or curable eventually? That's my question. What progress are we making as a country towards that end?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. we are making baby steps. What we are doing with the national body is to sort of have forums and inviting clinicians, and sometimes even invading their territories and trying to just empower them to be able to make decisions. And what we're actually encouraging hospitals is to actually, for patients with hard to cure illnesses, let's say cancer and such, to have goals of care so that whenever somebody is initiating a treatment, then there's a documented sort of achievement that they want to achieve with that intervention. And that I have seen a bit of shift in terms of clinicians, and especially who are in active care, saying, yeah, I don't think they, from the goals of care perspective, I don't think I'm able to support this patient to achieve cure, and therefore they need now to transit to palliative care for support. The other bit is also now, as you mentioned, in West, you are having sort of multidisciplinary approach. So even that is also something we're introducing to hospitals, so that when let's say, for example, if you walk to Kenyatta National Hospital, you'll find a cancer patient or a patient with, let's say, heart failure is also being reviewed by a palliative care practitioner. So who also makes, sort of guides the team in terms of some of these aggressive interventions and say, from my experience and perspectives, these interventions will not add value to the patient and will not actually cause him more harm. But we still have a long way to go, because I've seen patients on oxygen receiving chemotherapy, and for my analysis, I can tell this patient is going to die in the next 1 week, and you wonder what sort of intervention. And when sometimes you assess why the clinician is doing this, it's purely out of greed. They want to make money out of it, even in sometimes in very desperate situations. And actually what is also trying to do is also have a sort of a law that is going to address issues of detaining bodies because of unpaid medical bill. Currently, there's a very strong ongoing discussion of a very senior lecturer in a private hospital within Nairobi. And I believe some of these cases, once they are properly documented and there is very low, clear law to sort of give guidance, we'll be able to sort of be able to address some of these issues. But it's a conversation that we have started from the palliative care practitioner's perspective, and we hope with time we'll be able to guide the country to move in the right direction.
Thank you.
And so as someone who straddled both sides, let me just throw in some more information for you. The capitalism is one of the issues because hospitals like the Aga Khans, the Nairobi, are all profit driven. So the longer you're treating this person with drugs, chemotherapy that's hundreds of thousands, the bottom line is good for the hospital despite the end results. And when you look at the itemized bill, usually it's not even the doctor's bill that's the highest, it's other factors. Then when you cross this side of the Atlantic, patient reviews are key as a huge deal. So like the surgeons who take more risky surgical procedures, even when you know this person is gonna die, but they just do it, they need to prove that like you can't die in a certain period for it to look good on my side. You understand? For review purposes, I'm just telling you as an former insider, I've left, I'm in the public health side now. I've ditched my people.
I can verify that. I actually observed that in the hospital. So.
Yeah, so for surgeons, it's a big deal if they do a surgical procedure and the patient dies the same day. But if the patient dies in 1 week, so they're gonna do everything for them to look good so that they can retain their job and their salary. So it's capitalism, and we need to have the conversations. And when you see like this group, and if you sambaza this recording, more people will be aware of it, so that you know so-and-so has glioblastoma stage 4. There's no freaking way we are starting surgery on this person and chemo. Let them just go see their birds and die in peace, so that the surgeon is not forced to do other procedures that will look good on his CV and look good for the hospital's bottom line. So yes. Asaf, did you have a question? And then, yeah, Jane has to leave. Or Jane, do you want to just unmute and then and say goodbye? I think we are about to wind it up. Yeah, Jane, you can say kwaheri. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of this community morning meeting. Really, I learned so much, and thank you.
Thank you, and kwaheri. At least we are neighbors. I can visit you one day with chapati. Okay, bye-bye. Asaf, do you have any questions? And then I'm gonna stop recording so that we can have like a free session for those ones who will be still here.
Yeah, for me, I don't have any question. I just want to thank you for organizing this very informative, interactive session. And I hope as we continue, this will also help to put appropriate measures in place for our country so that we reduce the suffering of both the patients and family. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to stop the live stream, and then thank you for the panelists who've been here. Thank you. This was wonderful. And I'm going to invite, like, if you have a question and you don't want it live stream, this is the point to